Okay, so Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Again, it's a blessing to be here with you, studying again the word of our Lord and going through again the Torah portions. I thank the Lord for his goodness and kindness during this time of recuperation. I thank all of you for your prayers and support during this time. With some of you, I've talked during this period of time. And so hopefully, at some point, we'll be able to meet again in the congregation. In the meantime, we'll be doing our studies through Zoom. So today, the Torah portion is called Vayetze, Vayetze, and it's found in the book of Genesis, chapter 28, verse 10, up to chapter 32, verse 2. And Vayetze can be translated as went out or he exited, went out or he exited. As a matter of fact, the word yet says is still used in Israel today. When you see the exit signs, that's what it says, yet to go out, to it's an exit, okay? So last time in the Torah portion, if you were keeping up with the Torah portions, we have that Jacob, we know last time, he received the blessing from his father, the firstborn blessing, that his mother helped him convince Isaac that he was Esau when really he was Jacob. Now, some people think that he did that in a deceiving manner, which in a way it was because he impersonated Esau, but we know that truly the firstborn blessing was his because God told Rebecca from the moment that she was pregnant that she was having twins and that the older would be the servant of the younger and that the younger would be the one to receive basically the blessing. So what she did knowingly because she knew that it was for Jacob the blessing and not for Esau. Because even though they were twins, they were completely opposite. It was like day and night. Jacob was a man that studied under his grandfather Abraham and then his father Isaac. He was a man of what we would call a Torah scholar. He understood the covenant. He understood what it meant, the responsibility of the blessing, while Esau was more into the physical world, into the material world. He loved to hunt and be in the field. And usually when it talks about being in the field or being in the tent, someone that is always in the tent means that is always that person is studying always Torah, is always studying the word. While someone is in the field, like Esau, means that he's in worldly stuff, worldly activities. Okay, so the Torah portion continues now. The next, starting with this Torah portion, the next 6 Torah portions are basically talking about the life of Jacob. So in verse 10 of chapter 28 of Genesis, and today I'm using a New King James Version, just in case, okay? And it says, verse 10, now Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. Now right there, the commentaries say that in that travels from Beersheba to Haran, it took him 14 years because he made a stop at the yeshiva of Eber. Eber. The yeshiva used to be also with Shem, but by this time Shem, which was one of the sons of Noah, had passed away. And so he goes there to get into the word, to study more about the covenant, to study more Torah with Eber. Why? Because he was preparing himself for what was coming. Okay, remember that he has to, from where he travels all the way to Haran, is basically easily a 6-month travel. It's going to take him at least 6 months to get to Haran. Now, again, like I was saying prior to starting, that to understand what's going on in these chapters, we need to understand the culture and the time in which this has been being written. Why? Because the customs, the society, and the things that are happening were very specific for this time. So when you read that, as we're going to be reading, that Jacob had, he was looking for one wife and found himself having 4. you're going to say, well, doesn't God say that you can't have more than one wife? And, so you have to go back to the culture and you have to understand what's happening before you judge and say that this is completely wrong. We cannot look at what we're reading with a Christian mindset, and definitely not based on our culture or our time, because we're going to misinterpret the message. So we have to understand what's going on. So Haran, we have to understand that Haran is in the area of Mesopotamia. So we have to understand a little bit about what's going on during this time in the ancient Near East and in Mesopotamia, so we can then understand what's going on with Jacob. Verse 11. So he came to a certain place, and that certain place in the Hebrew is the word makom. Makom. And makom is another name for the Temple Mount, and it's also one of the names of Hashem, one of the names of the Lord, makom. Because we have to understand that the temple and the Lord cannot be separated. They always go together. Speaking about the temple is basically speaking about the Lord, and speaking about the Lord, you're speaking about the temple. So it says he went to a certain place, Makom, and stayed there all night because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it at his head, and he lay down in that place to sleep. Now, one of the things that the commentaries say, and depending on what translation you read, some translations in the Hebrew says that he took stones, many stones. And what he did is not that he used them as a pillow, because I don't think anybody can really use a stone as a pillow. It's being so hard and uncomfortable. But he put these stones around his head and around his body to protect himself. And it says he lay down in that place to sleep. Verse 12. Then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached to heaven, and there the messengers of God were ascending and descending on it. So what is translated as ladder in the Hebrew is the word sulam. Sulam. It's translated as ladder, but if we go back, remember we're in the area close to Mesopotamia. It's the ancient Near East, and most likely what he was seeing, what's called a ziggurat. Ziggurat, and I'll be showing you later what that looks like. It's a structure that kind of looks like a pyramid. It sometimes looks like a temple, but it's inside. There's nothing. It's empty, completely empty. Sometimes it's just filled with sand. And basically, what it's doing is you have these square structures, one on top of the other, going from larger to smaller. It's almost like an artificial mountain. And the purpose of that mountain, if you remember the concept of a cosmic mountain, is going to be a point of connection between the heavens and the earth to allow the gods to come down. Of course, it's not any gods. What we're seeing here is that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the creator of heaven and earth, is going to make contact with Jacob. And so what he sees that's translated as a ladder, most likely something similar to a ziggurat. And that's spelled Ziggurat, ziggurat. And it says that what he saw were the messengers of God going up and down. So what is that telling us? That this is like a portal. It's a portal or dimension that's open, where the heavens and the earth are connected. And so all these messengers are going up and down doing their mission. They're called messengers. God is sending them out to bring messages to whoever he has, or to whatever they're supposed to do. So they're doing their job. They go down, do whatever they do, then come back up. And so this is a place of connecting the heavens with the earth. Verse 13, and behold, the Lord stood above it and said. So we have that the Lord is at the top of this supposed ladder that Jacob is seeing. So the Lord doesn't come down, but he's all the way at the top of this ladder, and says to Jacob, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west, and the east to the north and the south. Now, what's written here as you shall spread abroad in the Hebrew is the word paratz. Paratz, which means to break, like a breaker, someone that makes a breach. Remember that Yeshua is also called the breaker, the one that makes a breach, that he opens up a way for the kingdom. So the same thing is with Jacob and his descendants. So you're going to make a breach abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and the south. And in you and in your seed, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. So this is very important, because remember that this trip that Jacob is doing is going to be for a long time, because the purpose is to find a wife. And right now the Lord is giving him hope and letting him know, you're not going by yourself. I am going with you, and I will prosper you, and everything will be according to what I have planned for you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Now it's interpreted like a dream, but it could have been also like a vision, because this is something that is not just any dream. I mean, I don't think no one could ever forget something like this. And he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place, Hamakom. This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So he's telling you this is a point, again, a connecting point between heaven and earth, is a portal, is a gateway. Now, most people think or say, the commentaries, that they believe that this is Mount Moriah, that this is the place of the future temple, because of what it says, that is the house of God. And we know that anytime the term house is used, especially in reference to God, it's talking about the temple. And that it's a gateway. It's a place where God connects heaven and earth. So most likely this is Mount Moriah, but if you look in terms of a map, Bethel today is north of Jerusalem, and the Temple Mount is in Jerusalem. So is it that Bethel, or is it a different Bethel, or he's just calling the house of God Bethel, Mount Moriah? Now there's, again, opinions that go both ways. Now, like I was saying last night, I believe, and it's my personal opinion, and this is not written anywhere, I have not seen it, but by studying the temple, we know that the temple had 13 gates. The first temple, the second temple, even the tabernacle, even though it mentions only the eastern gate, even the tabernacle had to have 13 gates, because the pattern is always the same. It never changes. So my personal opinion is that this is a gateway, another portal, another gate to that sacred space of God within Israel. And I believe that there are 13 gates, 13 portals that also open up, connecting the heavens with the earth. But that's my opinion. Maybe in the future, they'll find out it's true, but if not, again, it's just my opinion. So anyway, so this is a portal. This is an entrance, which most likely is in reference to Mount Moriah. Now, the way the commentaries try to fix this in the terms that there is a geographical Bethel, and then there's the Temple Mount. And what they say, one of the Midrash says that God brought basically Mount Moriah all the way to Bethel, so that Jacob could see the place of where the temple was going to be. So again, there's the opinion, this is Mount Moriah, and other people don't think so. Either way, it is a portal. It is a place where God communicates from heaven to earth. And it says, 18, then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put at his head. Now first it says many stones, and now there's only one stone. Set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. So what he's doing is, what they say is that all these stones became one, that initially he had taken 12 stones, which some people say, the commentaries, that these stones were from the altar that Abraham had used to offer up Isaac. Now you have to remember that Isaac is Jacob's father. So he's back where his father had been offered, and where Abraham was so faithful to the Lord that he was willing to offer his only son. So they say that these stones were probably from that altar, and now they had become one. And so he sets it up as a pillar or as a memorial or as a witness of what had happened there. And he anoints it. Why does he anoint it? Because remember that every time anything is anointed or oils put on it, you're separating it with a purpose. You're separating it with a function. You're separating it unto the Lord. It has a definite reason to be anointed because of what happened there with Jacob and what he saw. And he called the name of that place Bethel, which means house of God in Hebrew. But the name of the city had been Luz previously. Now Luz, I think, is Aramaic for almond, for the almond. Now remember that the almond in the Bible, because of the shape of an eye, has to do with being vigilant. It has to do with watching. It has to do with keeping. So every time God mentions almonds, it's in reference that he is watching for his word to be fulfilled, because the almond has the form of an eye. Then Jacob made a vow. You have to remember that making vows during this time was something very, very important. The vows had to be fulfilled. So he makes a vow saying, if God will be with me, because you have to remember that he's had this vision, that he's had this dream, and so he wants to make sure that this is true, that this is real. So he says this, he says, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I am going, and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone, which I have set as a pillar, shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will surely give 1/10 to you. So even though the Torah has still not been given as a national covenant to the people, we have tithing here, because he understands that to a king, because God is a king, the sovereign king, you always give a tribute. Even though the king is the one that always provides for you, out of that provision, in your gratitude and your respect, and as part of your responsibility, you always set aside a tithe to give back to your king as a sign of honor and of covenant. And so when he's asking for bread to eat and clothing, the commentaries mention that the bread is reference to Torah, because we know that the word is bread, and Yeshua is the bread of life. And so when he speaks about bread, he's speaking about Torah. And when he speaks about clothing, he's speaking about the commandments, because it is the good deeds that we do. Remember the clothing of righteousness, the linen, the fine linen that the bride wears, is the doing of the commandments. So clothing here has to do with commandments, and bread has to do with Torah. And so he makes a vow, he makes a promise that everything that God gives him, out of everything that he receives, he will give 1/10. Now in chapter 29, we have that Jacob finally meets Rachel. And it's interesting that he finds her at a well. Many of the patriarchs found their wives at a well. Many of the men in the Bible find women at the well. Why? Because the wells have to do with waters of salvation. And we know that for whatever reason, it's mostly women who come first to the feet of the Lord, who come first to acknowledge the word, and then their husbands come. So there's a relationship of waters of salvation and wisdom and wells with women. So it says, so Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And he looked and saw a well in the field, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, my brethren, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. Now you have to remember that it's been at least 6 months since the travels of Jacob to his uncle's home. Then he said to them, do you know Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. So he said to them, is he well? And they said, he is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Then he said, look, it is still high day. It is not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go and feed them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. So we have to understand that in this place, in this area, most likely all the shepherds and all the herdsmen had some sort of contract among them that no one would make use of the waters of the wells until everybody was there. Why? To make sure that everybody had a fair share of the waters. And so until everybody got there, nobody took the stone out, and probably they needed 2 or 3 men to move the stone. So they were waiting for everybody to get there. Verse 9, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now we have to understand that most of the time women didn't do these type of jobs. It was mostly men. The only reason for her to be doing this was that there were no male sons in the family. And so we know that most likely it was just Leah and her. And even though Leah's older, which was probably her responsibility to do this, we know that they describe Leah as having weak eyes. So it's probably that she either had could not be in the sun too long or had other health issues. And so that's why Rachel was doing this job. And most likely some of the commentaries say that Rachel was probably 11 or 12 years old when she was doing this. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. So he does, if you remember, when Eliezer was sent by Abraham to find a wife for Isaac, that Rebecca was the one bringing out the water, feeding, watering the animals for Eliezer. She was going back and forth. And here it's Jacob who's doing that. He sees Rachel. He immediately takes the stone from the mouth of the well, where some people, the commentaries say that he probably was very strong, or that he was so emotional to see a relative after so many months traveling by himself, that his strength, his emotion, his excitement allowed him to be able to remove the stone. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. Some people think, again, because he's seeing a relative after so long, he finally sees somebody that he knows that he's made it to where he was going. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative and that he was Rebekah's son. So she ran and told her father. Then it came to pass when Laban heard the report about Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things. Now you also have to remember that Laban is not that such a nice guy. He was probably thinking, remembering that when Eliezer came to get Rebecca, all the goodies that he brought, all the silver and the gold. And so he's probably thinking that Jacob also has all these riches with him since he's in the search of a wife. And Laban said to him, verse 14, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? So this is after 30 days. Now he's asking him, he's already been serving Laban. Well, how much should I pay you for your work? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. Now, if you study what's called the bridal price, because you have to remember that Jacob, when he finds himself here at this point, he doesn't have anything. Now, the commentaries say the following, that when he left his home, he left with silver and gold and gifts for his future wife, but that Esau, because Esau, remember, hated his brother for what he had done to him about his birthright and his blessing, that Esau sent his son Eliphaz, his firstborn son, to kill Jacob. Now this is the midrash. This is what the commentaries say. That Esau sent his son, and Eliphaz ran after Jacob to kill him. And when he saw his uncle, he felt like he couldn't kill him. So he was afraid that his father Esau was going to do something to him because he didn't kill Jacob. So Jacob says, well, you don't want to kill me. I don't want to die. So let's do something so you won't be in trouble with your dad. Take everything that I have, take it to your father and let him know that you killed me. And this is the evidence by taking all my stuff. So that's why Jacob, when he comes to Haran, he doesn't have anything to offer Laban as a bridal price for Rachel. So that's why he says, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel. And according to this time frame, the price for serving for 7 years was more costly than would have been the bridal price. So he was paying even more than what he would have brought as a bridal price for Rachel. And it says, verse 20, verse 18, now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go into her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Now you're going to say, didn't he know that it wasn't Rachel? Well, one of the commentaries say that Leah and Rachel were twins. So therefore they had the same body size, the same form. Other people say that the veil that she was wearing was very thick, and that even their voices were similar, so he couldn't tell the difference. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, there was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? What is it? What was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me? So, because you have to remember that by saying that he would work 7 years for Rachel, this is a contract. This is a legal contract. And so here we have that Laban is not fulfilling his side of the contract, but this is the way he defends it. He says, and Laban said, it must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. So according to what Laban is saying, it was the rule of the land, of this place, of this culture, of this time, that the older women in the house had to be married first, then the younger. Now, I read in the commentary that law has never really been found. So maybe Laban made this up, and Jacob, not knowing any better, the rules of the land, he took it as truth. And so it said, so Laban tells him, fulfill her week, because you have to remember that Jewish weddings last a week. And that tradition is taken from this as the same thing about wearing a veil. Now, usually here in the States, when the bride is coming, it's at the altar that the groom pulls the veil away from the face of his betrothed to see if it's her. But in Judaism, in the weddings among Jews, the custom is that the bridegroom goes to the bride and he puts the veil on her to make sure that she is his bride. So those two traditions come from this episode of Jacob and Rachel, just to make sure that no one gets the same result of marrying the wrong woman. And it says, fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years. Then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife also. Now it's interesting that for Rachel, he doesn't make a feast. He just lets Jacob fulfill the week with Leah, and then he gives him Rachel. So Rachel really didn't have a wedding. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. So these are the gifts that Laban is giving to his daughters, maidservants. Then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served with Laban still another 7 years. So far, it's taking him 14 years and he ends up with 2 wives. Again, we know that is not the plan of God for a man to have more than 1 wife. And I think that men would agree on that one is enough. One wife is more than enough. Imagine 2, even 4. So anyway, because of what's going on, it was Laban's idea. It wasn't Jacob's idea to have more than 1 wife. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Because he's seeing the difference that the way Jacob is treating Leah in comparison to Rachel. So Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. So Reuben means see a son. Now, therefore, my husband will love me. And we have to remember that during this time in this culture, if a woman was barren, that was seen as something shameful. If a woman did not give birth to a son, it was dishonorable, not only to her, but to her husband. So during this time in this culture, it was allowed, if a man, his wife could not bear him children, that it was allowed for him to have either a second wife or a maidservant of the wife and have relations with her. And that child that was born with the maidservant or with the second wife would legally belong to the first one. Because again, it was dishonorable not to have children. And also during this time, once a wife gave a son to the husband, that elevated her status. So Leah is thinking, I have given the firstborn son to Jacob. My status as the first wife has been elevated. And it says in verse 33, then she conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Shimon, which comes from the word Shema, which means to hear. She conceived again and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will become attached to me because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore his name was called Levi, which comes from the word that has to do to accompany or to be attached or to be with. And she conceived again and bore a son and said, now I will praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah or Yehuda. Then she stopped bearing. Even though they say praise, really the name Yehuda comes from being thankful, from the word Hodah. When you say Hodu le'Adonai kitov, in other words, give thanks to the Lord, that's what the name really means. It's more of a praiseful thanks to the Lord. So it's interesting that Leah gives him 4 sons, of which 2 tribes, the tribe of Levi and the tribe of Judah, are so important because from the tribe of Levi is going to come the priesthood, or from the tribe of Judah is going to come the kingship. Chapter 30. Now when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Now remember that not having children was seen as a curse. So many people during this time believed that the gods cursed women if they were not able to have children. Now we know that there could be biological reasons, medical reasons, and most of the time, by that time, they understand that it's the male who basically gives the sexuality of the children. And so the responsibility in this case really goes to the woman, because the woman is the one that brings the honor to her husband by having children. So she said, here is my maid Bilhah, go into her and she will bear a child on my knees, that I also may have children by her. So why does she do this? Again, like I was saying, if a woman cannot have children, now remember he worked 14 years, so it's been at least 14 years. He's been married with both of them. And still Rachel had no children. So Legally and culturally, it was allowed for Rachel to give Jacob her maidservant, and her maidservant, when she was about to give birth, she would sit on the knees of Rachel, and it would be like as Rachel were having the child. So that firstborn child of Bilhah was really not Bilhah's, but legally was going to be Rachel's. That way, taking the shame of not having children. Then she gave him Bilhah, her maid, as wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Verse 6, then Rachel said, God has judged my case, and he has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan, because Dan means judgment. And Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with great wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister, and indeed I have prevailed. So she called his name Naphtali, which means my wrestlings. Now, when Leah saw that she had stopped bearing, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as wife. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son. So here's poor Jacob running around all these tents, because most likely these women did not live together. Rachel had her tent, Leah had her tent, Zilpah had her tent, Bilhah had her tent. So he's running around doing all this to make sure that everybody's happy, because if mama ain't happy, nobody's happy. Then Leah said, a troop comes. So she called his name Gad. And Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, I am happy, for the daughters will call me blessed. So she called his name Asher, because Asher means happy or blessed or honorable. Now Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest, like Linda was saying before, so it's the time of Shavuot, and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes, because it was understood that they're not sure if this is really mandrakes or some kind of other plant. The thing was that they believed this was a fertility, something that would help with the fertility. So Rachel says, but she said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? And Rachel said, therefore, he will lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. In other words, it was probably Rachel's turn to have Jacob be with her as her husband, or it was now. So Leah says, okay, I'll give you the mandrakes if Jacob comes and sleeps with me instead of you. So they basically shuffled poor Jacob around with the mandrakes. When Jacob came out of the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come into me, for I have surely hired you with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, God has given me my wages, because I have given my maid to my husband. So she called his name Issachar, which comes from the word that has to do with wages. Then Leah conceived again and bore Jacob a sixth son. And Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will dwell with me, because I have borne him six sons. So she called his name Zebulon, which really means to reside, or to a habitation, to be with her. Instead of endowment, it really means to reside, like a residence. So we have here Leah has given basically Jacob half of the tribe of Israel, 6 sons already. And in spite of that, he still loved Rachel more than he did Leah. It's not that he did not love Leah, he just loved Rachel more than he did Leah. Afterwards, he bore a daughter and called her name Dinah, which is the female of the name Dan. So it still has to do with judgment. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son, and she said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. So the name Joseph means to add, has to do with adding. And it came to pass when Rachel had borne Joseph that Jacob said to Laban, Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service which I have done for you. And Laban said to him, please stay if I have found favor in your eyes, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. Now, my translation says that he has learned by experience, but in the Hebrew says that Laban, by divination, understood that the blessings that Laban was having was because of Jacob's presence. In other words, the abundance that came to Laban's house was because of Jacob's presence, because you have to remember that before Jacob got to Haran, he had the experience of Bethel, where God promised to be with him and to bless him, and that he will bring him back. And so that blessing was not only for Jacob, but anyone else that was around him. Verse 28, then he said, name me your wages and I will give it. In other words, Laban doesn't want him to leave because he understands that he's blessed because of Jacob's presence. So Jacob said to him, you know how I have served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming, and now when shall I also provide for my own house? In other words, even though that Jacob worked so hard for Laban, he was really not seeing the labor of his work. He was not, really making any salary. He's not really making anything for his own family. Basically, everything was going to Laban. And he says, then he said, so Jacob said to him, you know how I served you and how your livestock has been with me. For what you had before I came was little, and it has increased to a great amount. The Lord has blessed you since my coming. And now when shall I also provide for my own house? So he said, what shall I give you? And Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flocks. So now Jacob comes with a way of obtaining what Laban had not given him. Because we're going to see in the following chapter that it was through something that God showed him in a dream how to deal with Laban. And it says, verse 32, let me pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted sheep, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and these shall be my wages. So my righteousness will answer for me in time to come, when the subject of my wages comes before you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the lambs will be considered stolen if it is with me. So what's going on? You have to also understand that during this time in the culture, the flocks of sheep, the majority of the flocks were white, and the majority of the goats were black. So what Jacob is telling Laban is, okay, the majority of your flocks are white and black. And he says, you hardly have any ones that are speckled or spotted or whatever, different colors. He says, the ones that are born, they're going to be born spotted and speckled and different colors. Those will be mine. And if none of them are like that, then everything else is yours. So what does Laban think? Listen, you're a moron. The majority of the flock is white and black, and you're expecting to get speckled. And I mean, it wasn't that it wouldn't happen, but it's very rare. Because again, the dominant genetic findings of these sheep and goats were either that all the sheep were white and all the goats were black. And so it was very rare that you find anything with spots or speckled or different colors. And Laban said in verse 34, oh, that it were according to your word. So he removed, so Laban, this is what he does. So he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, everyone that had some white in it, and all the brown ones among the lambs, and he gave them into the hands of his sons. So two things we learned, that by now Laban has sons, because remember that Rachel was shepherding his flock. which kind of lets us know that Laban did not have sons up to this point. So it's been over 14 years, and because Laban was being blessed because of the presence of Jacob, he already had sons. So now the sons, Laban tells his sons, take away all the goats and sheep that are speckled and spotted, so that way, if they procreate, Jacob cannot take those away. In other words, he's just leaving the flock that's all white and all black with Jacob, so Jacob can keep them. Okay? Because Laban is thinking it's rare that these white lambs and these black goats are going to have spotted, different colored animals. So that way Jacob is not going to make anything. He's not going to get anything. But we know that God had a different plan, because it says, so he removed that day the male goats that were speckled and spotted, all the, okay, so we said that. Verse 36, then he put 3 days journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flock. So basically Laban made sure that all those lambs that were speckled and spotted were at least 3 days away from Jacob, so Jacob could not see them and could not take care of them. Now Jacob took for himself rods of green poplar and of the almond and the chestnut trees, peeled white stripes in them, and exposed the white which was in the rods. And the rods which he had peeled, he set before the flocks in the gutters, in the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink, so that they should conceive when they came to drink. So the flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks brought forth streaked, speckled, and spotted. Then Jacob separated the lambs and made the flocks face toward the streaked, and all the brown, and the flocks of Laban. But he put his own flocks by themselves and did not put them with Laban's flock. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger livestock conceived, that Jacob placed the rods before the eyes of the livestock in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flocks were feeble, he did not put them in, so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man became exceedingly prosperous and had large flocks, female and male servants, and camels and donkeys. In other words, he did something that today scientifically has been found to be called epigenetics. Epigenetics, which means that our genes in our DNA can be affected in their expression by external factors. In other words, what Jacob was doing was putting an epigenetic source in front of those animals, that when they were mating, they were looking at these rods, and those rods were changing the expression of the genes of these white sheep and black goats. Because genetically, these animals do have the genes to produce spotted animals with other colors, but that is not dominant. So by putting these rods, this external stimulus was changing the expression, not the genes, not the DNA. It was changing the expression of these genes. So now these animals that were born with spots and different colors and stripes, and these were because this is what the contract was between him and Laban, that those that were born this way were going to be Jacob's, and Laban would just keep the ones with the solid colors. And this has been proven scientifically. That is why if you look up epigenetics, you will see that external sources, like what we see, what we hear, what we speak, what we eat, even the clothing that we wear, affects the expressions of our genes. Okay, so that is why we see a lot of things, similarities, why some people get certain cancers and others don't, or why even within a family, if they're twins, one gets something, one disease and the other doesn't. When they do research, they see that it might be different lifestyles. For example, one can be very healthy and very athletic and have a different mindset, It's been shown that a positive attitude is going to stimulate the expression of good genes, while a negative attitude is going to express not so favorable genes, other like diseases and situations, even some mental diseases can be associated with just things that we eat or we're listening to or we're looking or even we're speaking. So if you're interested in that topic, I suggest that you look it up because it's real and it's very interesting. It's called epigenetics. YouTube has a whole bunch of videos on it. And you'll see that basically this is what Jacob was doing. Of course, he didn't know that was that. And epigenetics is a new science. It was basically came about in the year 2000 forward, that was officially established as a science and has been proven. And there's a lot of things going on today with epigenetics. So what happens? So he has all these animals. So it gives time for Jacob to, because the more animals a person had during this time, it meant they were more prosperous, they were rich, and they could use these animals to trade or to buy things. So he was becoming very rich. Everything that his father-in-law did not give to him, God provided to him. Chapter 31, now Jacob heard the words of Laban's son saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he has acquired all this wealth. So they're thinking Jacob is stealing from our dad. And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not a favorable toward him as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock. So he called his wives away from Laban and away from all the other family to tell them this, and said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. And it happened at the time when the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon their flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. Then the messenger of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, here I am. And he said, lift your eyes now and see all the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. In other words, it was God, the messenger of God, who told Jacob to do what he did. It was the rods that he put in front of these animals when they were mating. Again, you don't think that God knew about epigenetics? Of course he did. I am the God of Bethel, reminding him, remember the experience you had in Bethel, the vow that you made, and you're keeping your vow, and I'm keeping my side of that vow. So I've been with you, I'll be with you. So don't fear at this point. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now arise, get out of this land and return to the land of your family. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us and also completely consumed our money. Because remember that Jacob was not able to give a bridal price, but he did work for that bridal price. And it was a custom during this time that part of the bridal price was given to the bride, to the wife, as an assurance in case she got divorced, that she would have some sort of income. But Laban basically took everything that Jacob gave Laban. Laban did not give back to his daughters. So Laban just kept taking away, taking away, taking away. For all your riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. Then Jacob rose and set his sons and his wife on camels, and he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. Now, usually people say that Rachel took this because it was she was an idolater, because she was believed in the power of these idols that were the family idols. Now you have to remember that during this time, there were national idols, there were state idols, there were family idols. And so depending on the families, they had these sort of idols that they worshiped, or they believed they were the ancestors, and it had to do with protection. Now, Rachel doesn't take them because of idolatry. She takes them because it was the cultural understanding, part of the society, that the firstborn of the family, who was going to take charge of the family once the father died, would be in charge of those idols. So this was a form of status. Having those family idols meant an elevation of status, and that Jacob would have been considered like a firstborn to Laban. But because Rachel understands that her father is not going to give that position to Jacob, because there's already a rift between both of them, she steals them because she believes that Jacob deserves the firstborn position of the family. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river. I'm sorry, verse 20. And Jacob stole away unknown to Laban, the Syrian, in that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river and headed toward the mountains of Gilead. And Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. So even though Jacob had fled earlier, than by the time Laban found out, Laban was still able to reach him, to get to where he was. Now you have to understand that Jacob was with a family, with children, with animals, and Laban was just coming with men to go after Jacob. So he would had opportunity to go faster than Jacob with his family. And Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey. He overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad," because God knows his heart. He knows already Laban is a deceiving crook, that all he wants to do is just take away from Jacob. So he's telling him, don't you dare mistreat Jacob, because I know how deceitful you've been. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you have stolen away unknown to me and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and songs, with timbrel and harp." And you know that's not true. He wouldn't have done none of that stuff if Jacob had told him, "Hey, we're leaving. Oh, let me do a feast for you." Yeah, right. "And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power." Listen what he says to Jacob. "It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad.' And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I said, perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force." So he was afraid to tell Laban he was leaving, because he thought Laban was going to take away his wives. "With whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of our brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you." For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So he pronounces a curse. Whoever has them, let them die. But he didn't know Rachel had the idols. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and to the two maids' tents, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, put them in the camel's saddle, and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise before you, for the manner of women is with me. In other words, she told him that she was menstruating. And he searched, but did not find the household idols. Then Jacob was angry and rebuked Laban, and Jacob answered and said to Laban, what is my trespass? What is my sin that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. These 20 years I have been with you, your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried their young, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. That which was torn by beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was in the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I've served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. And Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters, listen to what Laban has the guts to still say to Jacob. These daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children. This flock is my flock. All that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these my daughters or to their children whom they have borne? Now therefore come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me. So again, Laban does this because he's probably afraid that the God of Jacob is going to do something to him, because Laban can't really do nothing against Jacob because he was already warned. But still he says that everything belongs to him. So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar, a witness. Then Jacob said to his brethren, gather stones, and they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap, because you have to remember that in a covenant, there's always has to be a meal. In other words, an animal has to be killed because the blood is what establishes the covenant, confirms the covenant. Laban called it Yegar Sahaduta, but Jacob called it Gilead or Galid. And Laban said, this heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore his name was Galid, also Mitzpah, because he said, may the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from another. In other words, if one or the other breaks the covenant, only God knows which one did what. Because if they're not seeing each other, only God is the witness for this covenant. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. Then Laban said to Jacob, here is this heap, and there is this pillar, which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place. So Jacob went on his way, and the messengers of God met him. Remember that when he was leaving from Bethel to Haran, he saw the messengers going up and down the ladder. And now he sees them again, but this time he really sees them. This is not a dream. When Jacob saw them, he said, this is God's camp. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim, which means 2 camps, because it was Jacob's camp and the camp of God's angels or messengers. Now I want to take a moment to share with you the screen so that I can show you the ziggurat. And let me put this play here, play the slide. Okay, so This is what's called a ziggurat. So what they describe as a ladder is possible. It's possible there was something similar to this, because again, the ziggurat is a artificial mountain that the people of Mesopotamia would build, because their understanding was that this would serve as a cosmic mountain or as a portal, a connector between the heavens and the earth. And they believed that the gods would use this to come down from the heavens onto the earth. So during the time, the context of this culture, the context of when this is happening, this was understood. So what Jacob is seeing is nothing new. There was an understanding that there was always something that connected the heavens to the earth, a way where the gods would come down. So even when they talk about the Tower of Babel, most likely it was something like this architecture, like this structure, a ziggurat. It was not a tower like we imagine a tower today. It was something probably more similar to this, which has some stairs. Inside here, there's nothing. Most of the time they filled it up with sand. It doesn't have any other function except to be like a stepping stool for the gods to come down from the heavens down to the earth. And they kind of look like a pyramid, which maybe most likely the pyramids also had that kind of function. So this is a ziggurat. And again, the function was to serve as a ladder or as a connector or as a cosmic mountain from which the gods could come down to the earth. And here, this is Bethel. Today, geographically, Bethel is here, which is north of Jerusalem. And here's Beersheba, from which Jacob made his journey. Now we know that he has to go from Beersheba all the way to Bethel, where he has the experience with God. And then from there, he has to go to Haran, which is further north and away from where he's at, which probably took him at least minimum 6 months of travel. So the reason I'm showing this is because you see Bethel is north of Jerusalem, where the Temple Mount is. And so that's why there is the opinions that Bethel is probably not the one that Jacob was talking about, but that probably what he's calling Bethel is in the area of Jerusalem, because that's where the Temple Mount is, and that's where the temple was established, and that is truly the house of God. But my opinion, like I said before, I think there's several portals, several points within Israel, several gateways, most likely 13, that can serve as gateways of connecting heaven to earth, of which the prominent and the most important one is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And this is to show you the what would have been the speckled, spotted, colored goats and sheep that Jacob was able to have with putting those rods by the use of epigenetics to make his flocks grow in terms of numbers, because most of the flocks of Laban were white sheep and black goats. They had solid colors. And so therefore, by doing what he did with the rods, was provoking that the expression of the genes in these animals would allow them to bear animals that were spotted. And so this was going to be then the property of Jacob. And so he was able to have many of these, and Laban couldn't say these are not yours, because Laban had already separated those that were spotted from his flock and just gave Jacob the ones that were solid colors, so for Jacob to take care of. And this is just to let you know, anyone else who's watching the videos on YouTube, if you're interested in the live Zoom meetings, you can send me an email to romeronereida@gmail.com. And that way I can let you know when we do our live meetings, because once I'm finished with this, you have an opportunity to ask questions, and that way we can have questions and answers. Also on my YouTube channel, there's over 200 Bible teachings, so that you can listen to those and share with your family and friends by subscribing to youtube.com/c/Dr. Nereida Romero. And there you have access to all the teachings. So with that, we finished our Torah portion. And so we're going to take a few minutes for questions. So if you have any questions, please be free to ask.